MzeroA Nation, Jason here. Welcome into now day 18 of the 31-day Safer Pilot Challenge, and we're taking just a different approach now. We've been learning so much about landings and radio communications and everything else, but now it's time to get into the decision making, and we do that so often. We teach decision making through stories. And unfortunately, there is an aviation disaster. It's actually the worst aviation disaster until September 11th. And it occurred in the Canary Islands on a little island called Tenerife. And as you'll see, these are two actually chartered 747s, one coming from LAX, that's a long flight, and one coming from Amsterdam. I want you to watch as this story begins to unfold for macho hazardous attitudes. Things like get there-itis. I also want you to watch for poor communication, not just from the controllers, not just from the pilots, but from the crew members amongst themselves. We still have flight engineers as this occurs. So watch how the crew, the controllers, the pilots communicate with each other and the controllers, and really look at those interactions here. So this actually occurs on March 27th, 1977. Pan Am 1736 was actually already running behind from the start. It had the longest journey of the two. It was actually leaving from Los Angeles, had a brief stopover in JFK to pick up more passengers who were heading for a cruise before continuing on for the Canary Islands. Now, it was during their leg over the Atlantic Ocean that something happened, causing them to divert. Now, a brief history lesson. The Canary Islands are still to this day a province of Spain. And in 1977, the tensions between the people of the Canary Islands and Spain were at an all-time high. The Canary Islands are actually fighting, albeit unsuccessfully, for their independence from Spain. It was on March 27, 1977, that two men entered the Las Palmas airport, which was actually the intended airport of both Pan Am 1736 and KLM 4805. Now, this is before we had airport security that we have today, and two men rolled in a suitcase to the terminal that was ticking. Now, they left this suitcase actually just outside of a small flower shop and left the airport. Minutes later, they called the airport switchboard operator and simply said these words: "There are bombs," plural, "in the airport," and hung up. Within seconds of hanging up, the bomb actually exploded. The airport was quickly evacuated and promptly closed. ATC was notified and notified the inbound aircraft, both our Pan Am and our KLM planes, and placed them in a hold above the airport, really just waiting further instructions. Now, to this news, our KLM captain, Captain Van Zanten, was super upset and concerned. After all, he was actually truly kind of like the poster boy of KLM. He was in the in-flight magazine. He was actually the head of the training department. 11,000 flight hours. He spent most of his time, though, now in the sim, more so than he did in the airplane. In fact, the first officer he was flying with, that had 9,000 flight hours, he had trained on the 747 just months prior to this. So our captain, you can see, kind of has this starboy type persona as a captain for KLM. He literally is in the in-flight magazine, as you can see on your screen there as well. Our flight engineer actually had more hours than both of them, though, with 17,000 flight hours. And this is where I want to pause for a second. Just because somebody has a ton of experience doesn't mean they're always going to have that or be the greatest. You know, if I told you I've been playing guitar for almost 20 years, and if I asked you, I've been playing guitar for 20 years, how good of a guitar player do you think I am? The truth is, I'm just average. I can play some chords, I can keep time, and that's about where my guitar playing really ends. I know a song or two from memory, and that's about it. Just because you've been doing something for a long time doesn't mean you're always going to be the best or an expert at it, right? It takes deep levels of practice to do that. And again, if you've read your Aviation Mastery book already, you know that, and you know that story as well. So our captain wasn't so happy about this news, and the reason for his anger was actually because of a KLM rule that was actually taken from Dutch law, which was forbidding overtime for flight crew members. So, of course, the rule was known as a safety measure. However, already having flown several hours, still a return trip back to Amsterdam, Captain Van Zanten knew he only had a few hours he could spare, so this delay was really not what he wanted. Now, coincidentally, just a few thousand feet above them was Pan Am 1736, piloted by Victor Grubbs, a 21,000-hour pilot, assisted by his first officer, 10,800 hours, and a flight engineer with 15,000 flight hours. There is so much experience sitting inside of these two cockpits, and yet they're going to lead us to what it was at the time, the largest aviation disaster. So after this hour of holding at Las Palmas knew it, that they weren't going to be opening anytime soon. Because again, the caller called up and said there are bombs, plural, in the airport. There's really only one, but they had to take precautions because they heard multiple, plural. So the airport was shut down for much longer than they expected. So they were told and instructed instead to divert to Los Rodeos Airport, now called Tenerife North Airport. Los Rodeos was an airport that pilots often criticize because the airport ramp and taxiways were just so small and poor condition. The runway was 11,000 feet, but it was just really beat up and starting to crumble. Plus there was a hump in the middle of the runway, which made it very difficult to see the other end. And I can actually show you that picture. I mean, if you can see the hump from here, we're at what, 300 feet in this picture. So you can see the hump, not quite in the middle of the runway, a little closer to 1-2, but you can see it. And it's funny, there's actually a 50-foot difference in touchdown zone elevation between the two ends of the runway. So it's pretty serious difference. So as we're really gearing up here and look at our pilots, KLM lands first on runway 30, and Captain Van Zanten parked as close to the terminal as he could get his 747. Originally told the passengers they're going to have to wait on the plane, but after much uproar from the cabin, he called over an air stair and the shuttle buses began taking passengers over to the terminal. Shortly after that, Pan Am 1736 touched down and pulled onto a taxiway before parking the two planes literally just not right next to each other, but pretty darn close. It's kind of eerie. You can actually see this photo here was taken by a passenger. That's KLM in the foreground here and Pan Am in the background sitting at the Los Rodeos Airport. Let's now fast forward here 2 hours. Planes still grounded, all wondering when is Las Palmas going to open. It's only 59 nautical miles away, but it's where we want to go. The KLM pilots, in the meantime, remember they have these weird overtime rules. So they're beginning to get a little bit concerned. They're sitting in the cockpit and they have the following conversation. First officer, half an hour on the ground, more than an hour over there. Now we're right at 8 p.m. Captain, right, but that means nothing. I'll look out for myself. No messing around with me. What kind of captain, what kind of leader says that? Hey, I'm looking out for me, okay? I don't care about you guys. I'm looking out for me. There's no messing around with me. I don't know too many people that get excited about getting behind a leader like that now, do they? This conversation continues, though. Flight engineer, well, you can phone Hans Raben. Hans Raben's like the VP over there. And you can tell him that we'll be late then. I think there was some sarcasm in the tone there. First officer, but what are the repercussions? Captain, you face the judge. Flight engineer, definitely. And I don't know if this is kind of just like they're messing with him a little bit or what it is, but the conversation keeps going. The captain, and of course you can forget the company backing you. Not only a leader who thinks about himself, but then throws his company under the bus as well. Are we building a macho hazardous attitude a little bit that you can see here? First officer, is it a question of fines or of imprisonment? Yes, imprisonment. Captain, well, at any rate, it would mean a revocation of your certificate for quite a while. First officer, not for me. The basic operating manual says I have to obey the captain's orders first. I like the sarcasm here, perhaps, or a little dig back. Captain says, yes, and I won't give such in order. Again, I don't know the context. We couldn't see the body language, obviously. Maybe there was some sarcasm in here, some back and forth. I would hope so, but you see this and you kind of start to wonder a little bit. Well, our time is now 4:50. The plane's been sitting for 3 hours and we're starting to cool down temperature-wise as we get closer to night. The temperature and the dew point began to get just closer and closer. By 5:02, in fact, the visibility had dropped to just 300 meters, which was the minimum required for an international takeoff clearance to even be given here. With the fog still rolling in and time standing still, Captain Van Zanten decides to radio for fuel, as there's nothing else to do. So he figured, we could use some fuel, at least just to be safe. Of course, as time would have it, 5 minutes into his fueling procedure, Los Rodeos Tower calls up announcing that Las Palmas is now open. As everyone races to go fire up and go, Pan Am 1736 was actually in a tight spot because KLM, as you saw in the previous photo, was parked right in front of them. While the smaller DC-8s were able to taxi around, Pan Am was stuck behind the fellow 747, their KLM refueling. Getting impatient, actually, Captain Grubbs of the Pan Am, of the 747, ordered his first officer and flight engineer to deplane and measure the distance to see if they have enough clearance to get around the KLM 747. Much to their dismay, they came back and said they were about 30 feet short. Realizing they couldn't get around, they were stuck until KLM 4805 was done refueling. Now that refueling, by the way, made KLM 4805 actually 50 tons heavier and increased their takeoff roll by 15%. Another painful coincidence here. But finally done with fueling, Captain Van Zanten and his first officer radio for permission to start their taxi clearance. Tower, KLM 4805 on the ground, Tenerife. Tower says 4805. KLM says, we require a backtrack on 12 for takeoff 30. And Tower says, okay, taxi, and he kind of pauses here. And the controller later said in an interview, he paused because he was thinking, how on earth am I going to get something as big as a 747 to make this turn around? I don't think my runway is wide enough to make this 180-degree turn around. Do I get him off on a taxiway? How do I do this? So the controller said in the interview, that's what that pause is there. But the controller comes back to the holding position, runway 30, and leave the runway the third to your left. This third to your left is going to come up over and over again. Unfortunately, you hear it from KLM, you'll hear it from Pan Am, you hear it from the controller a lot. It's this third to the left. There's lots of, you see the links in our chain of events of an accident have been building, but this third to the left really adds an issue to it here. KLM says, Roger, sir, entering the runway at this time, and the first taxiway will get off for the beginning of runway 30. Now, he just said third, but they read back the first. Tower, okay, KLM 80, correction, 4805, taxi straight ahead for the runway, make a backtrack. The controller said, exit the third taxiway. KLM read it back incorrectly, first taxiway. Controller then comes back, just get to the end and turn around. Three, just different things all happening there. Can you see the confusion that continues to add and compound to all of these issues here? You want the first exit, sir? He's just thinking out here. Negative, negative, taxi straight ahead to the end of the runway and make a backtrack. Again, this is Tower. Tell them. So they clarified back and forth. Okay, sir. KLM comes back to say as they begin their taxi, trying to work that clarification we were just talking about in there. So they're all on the same page. At this point now, Pan Am is calling up. Finally, KLM is out of their way. It's our turn to taxi, they're saying. So they call on up. Tenerife, Clipper. Pan Am was called Clipper back then. 1736. Tower, Clipper 1736, Tenerife. We're instructed to contact you to taxi. Is that correct? They're going straight to Tower for reasons that are still unknown here. Affirmative. Taxi to the runway and leave the runway third to your left. They read it back properly. Third to the left. Okay. This third to the left, I'm telling you, continues to come up. Let's actually look this is just Google Maps here, so you can see it. This third taxiway proves difficult. So on the left side of your screen, you see that that's 1, 2, heading down to the right side of your screen would be 3, 0. Now, if you count, and I outlined it in yellow so you can see, and I actually want to zoom in here so you can see it a bit better. What do you see for the first 3 taxiways? I see 3 very difficult turns for a 747 to make. I mean, these are more when you're coming off runway 30 to make it easier than trying to make that a hard left turn followed by another hard right turn to keep heading down. Yet, what you don't know yet is in the notices to airmen, in our NOTAMs, Charlie 1, our first taxiway here, is closed. So if we go back to it, if Charlie 1 is closed, are we not counting that as a taxiway just because it's marked out X and it's closed? Because if so, that makes sense then. 1, 2, 3. Look at what would be the third taxiway if you didn't count taxiway number 1. That makes sense. That's an easy way off and in. This is why controllers now say exit Charlie 4 rather than the third taxiway. It's much better to say exit Charlie 4. You won't hear a controller say exit the third taxiway anymore. They may say exit Alpha 2, it's your third taxiway on your left, but they can give you the extra details. They're going to name the taxiway for you. Flight engineers now thinking out loud here. Third, he said, 3? Tower, third one to your left. Captain, I think he said first. How ironic is it? And again, this is, I've never been fortunate enough to go to the Canary Islands, but we're talking a United States-based crew in Pan Am, a Dutch-based crew in KLM, so a lot of different accents, and I don't know the accent being a Spanish Providence. I'd imagine a Spanish accent of some sort in the Canary Islands. We have all these different, right, melting pots of accents here, but it's ironic that both KLM and Pan Am heard first when it was third. A very interesting little tidbit there. Let's keep reading. I think he said first. Co-pilot says, I'll ask him again. Very, very smart. Of course we're going to ask him again. Now, just before we do that, Tower actually calls up KLM this time. KLM 4805, how many taxiways have you passed? As if they were supposed to be counting. I think we passed Charlie 4 now. At least their name out. That's the Charlie 4 that they wanted to exit Pan Am on and wanted KLM to exit on the first time, but didn't work out. Just kind of having this conversation there, asking them how they're going. Again, you can see where Charlie 4 would be. So you can kind of see where they're at in relation to Pan Am as they're working their way on out. Now, Pan Am, the co-pilot, comes on and says, wow, this first one is a 90-degree turn. And they're right. Yeah, okay, says the captain. Co-pilot, it must be the third. I'll ask him again. Tower, would you confirm that you want the Clipper 1736 to turn left at the third intersection? 7136, report leaving the runway. Clipper 1763. Can you see some communication breakdowns here, perhaps? Tower now says, KLM 8705 and Clipper 1736, for your information, the center line lighting is out of service. Just giving some more information there here. We need 800 meters if you don't have the center line. I read that in the back of, and he's kind of showing them this here. Because we need 800 meters to even consider taking off. We don't have that. We have 300 right now. This probably isn't a legal takeoff given this little fact that we have. But can we go back a radio call? Just report clear of the runway. Where do you want me to get off the runway? I thought you said the first, you kind of said the third, this taxiway is closed. It's to the point now of just let me know when you're clear of the runway. The captain, probably counting out loud, that's 2. The flight engineer, yeah, that's a 45-degree there. Look at those same hard 45-degree angles I was showing you earlier. Flight engineer says, next one is almost a 45. Captain, yeah, but it goes ahead. I think it's going to put us on the taxiway. And yeah, of course it's going to put you on the taxiway. Maybe he counts these, says the co-pilot. And if you look closely, there's little access roads kind of like in between, and they're thinking maybe he's counting these little tiny like access roads that even a 172 couldn't taxi on. It's more so for fuel trucks and stuff really going back and forth. They're just trying to figure out this third taxiway. Why couldn't we just say Charlie 4? Now, just then, Captain Van Zanten had completed his turn as he was coming back around. Began to hold the brakes and held the brakes for exactly, the NTSB says, 2.5 seconds before he released them and began applying full power. And this is the crazy part. We're not cleared for takeoff, and thankfully, somebody actually speaks up. Wait a minute, we don't have ATC clearance, says the first officer, the co-pilot in this case. Oh no, I know that. Go ahead and ask, says the captain. KLM 4805 is ready for takeoff, waiting for our ATC clearance. KLM 8705, you're cleared to the Papa Beacon. Climb and maintain flight level 90. Right turn after takeoff. Proceed with the heading 040 until intercepting the 325 radial from Las Palmas. VOR. Getting radio calls and everything else and call signs kind of messed up in there as you can see, but this is where it begins to get interesting. Roger, sir. We're cleared to the Papa Beacon, flight level 90, right turn, turn out 040 until intercepting 325, and we're now at takeoff. As you can hear the throttles revving up as he's reading this back, but they're not cleared for takeoff, right? We never heard that. The captain says in Dutch, "We gone," which means exactly what you think. We're gone. Here we go, right? Easy translation. Stand by for takeoff. I will call you, says the tower. This is going to prove important. I want to pause here for a second. Think about something. When is the only time when you're in your airplane you hear the words for and takeoff put together? There's only one time. Cleared for takeoff. You can look through the entire pilot controller glossary. For and takeoff are only put together in the sentence cleared for takeoff. Hold short, right? I'm told hold short, runway 36. They don't say hold short for takeoff. It's hold short, runway 36, awaiting IFR release or whatever it is. The only time the phrase for takeoff is used is cleared for takeoff. And again, we don't know all the answers, but the NTSB and investigators and historians believe, obviously they were taken off well before, and I've never been fortunate enough to sit up front in a 747, but I'd imagine it's quite loud up there when you bring those throttles up to full power. And maybe you just kind of faintly hear the words for takeoff. And you think, oh, it was cleared for takeoff, but it was stand by for takeoff. I will call you. And honestly, he already revved up the throttles once and brought him back when the co-pilot called him out on it, and was full power when the co-pilot was reading his clearance back. He wanted to get moving. He had the overtime duties that he knew he couldn't violate. It was just a short little flight. They had to get back in their own mind. But this is when things began to get just a little bit interesting here. Pan Am, and we're still taxiing down the runway, Clipper 1736. They're just thinking out loud, broadcasting this. Roger, 1736, report when runway clear, because he thinks KLM is holding short, because that's what he told him. Flight engineer says, is he not clear then in the KLM? He's saying this. And they continue with this conversation here. The captain, what'd you say? Flight engineer, is he not clear? The Pan American asking, it didn't sound like, oh yes, says the captain, as in, oh yeah, he must be clear. But we know he is not clear as they continue to taxi on down here. Pan Am actually gets very close to their Charlie 4 where they wanted to make that exit as KLM nears rotation speed, and the worst aviation disaster until September 11th actually occurs as Pan Am tries to make their turn off the runway. We actually know that KLM saw Pan Am simply because Captain Van Zanten pulled back on the yoke so much, he scraped the tail for about 50 feet trying to take off, about 50 feet before impact. In the Pan American plane, all three pilots ducked, and honestly, it saved their lives. In fact, the first thing the first officer did after impact was reach up for the roof-mounted fire extinguishers and is quoted later saying, "I only grabbed sky when I reached up there." There were 583 fatalities with just 61 survivors. The first officer in KLM never spoke up. But how could he, honestly? You are sitting next to the captain, really your instructor, who certified you in the aircraft just months earlier. Sometimes it's so hard to speak up, but we always have to. And this accident leaves me with so many what ifs. And I just made a list here I want to read off to you real quick. And think about some in your own head. But what if Pan Am 1736 wasn't late? They were late departing LAX. They were 4805 at Tenerife. What if there was never a bomb at the Las Palmas airport? What if the bomb threat just called in and said there's a bomb in the airport, not bombs, plural, and the airport opened sooner? What if Tenerife's taxiways were larger? Pan Am could have taxied around. What if Captain Van Zanten hadn't refueled? Literally take them up to 50 tons and increasing their takeoff distance by 15%. What if Pan Am said, you know what, we'll just wait rather than back taxi the only runway? What if the controller used stronger, more precise language? What if Pan Am left on the proper Charlie taxiway like they're supposed to? What if KLM had different expectations for the overtime rules as to not create such a distraction? The chain of events is vast with this one. And a lot of things were out of their control. They couldn't control this terrorist attack that happened at the airport. They can't control running late. They can't control the weather. There's so many things you cannot control. But tiny little mistakes, when other things in the circumstances are happening, it's a snowball. And snowballs what? They start small and they roll downhill and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. And it begins to compound. You know, people get hurt in airplanes usually. They just keep going. They keep flying much longer than they should. This would have been an instance just to slow down. Anytime you find yourself in this situation where you're stressed, you feel like you have to be somewhere, you're running behind, whatever it is, if anything, that's when you slow down that much more and think things through. I don't like talking about aviation accidents, but this just illustrates you can have a ton of experience and still make mistakes. And even the most experienced pilots, as we learned here today, can make mistakes. I realized this was a longer video for our Safer Pilot Challenge, and I sort of apologize for it. I think it is so foundational. I think it is so important to continue to share and learn and grow. I can't wait to read your comments below this video on YouTube, on Facebook, on MzeroA.com. I hope you're loving the Aviation Mastery book. I hope you grabbed your copy of it already. Thank you for making it such a success. Also look forward to seeing you at an Aviation Mastery live event soon as well. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and most importantly, remember that a good pilot is always learning. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see ya.